Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. I never thought I'd be telling anyone about this. Not in a million years. It sounds too unreal to be true, but I swear it happened. I'm not the type to get scared easily. I'm 21 and I've been living on my own for a couple of years now, working part-time jobs to get by while I finish college. Babysitting was one of those jobs. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I enjoyed it. I liked spending time with kids. They were easy to get along with, and it was a pretty low-stress gig compared to my other jobs. That evening, I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone while Ava, the 6-year-old I was babysitting, was glued to the TV watching cartoons. Jake, her 3-year-old brother, was on the floor pushing his little toy cars across the carpet with a concentration that only toddlers seem to have. The house was warm and quiet, and everything felt so normal. Nothing out of the ordinary at all. The parents were great, really kind people. They'd told me they'd be back by midnight. Nothing unusual. They were going out for a nice dinner, and I was happy to watch the kids while they had some time to themselves. They were always respectful of my time, and they paid on time, so I didn't mind the late hours. In fact, I was actually looking forward to it. I had a bit of homework I needed to get through, and babysitting was the perfect opportunity to knock it out while watching over 2 sleeping kids. Around 9:30 p.m., I got Ava and Jake ready for bed. I made sure Ava brushed her teeth and got into her cozy pajamas with little cartoon characters all over them. Jake had already fallen asleep, curled up with his favorite stuffed animal, and I tucked him in as gently as I could, careful not to wake him. I checked on both of them one last time before heading back to the kitchen to finish cleaning up. Everything was in order, and the house was quiet again. Now, I should mention that this house was nice, suburban, very safe neighborhood. There were trees lining the street, the kind you see in those perfect postcard-like neighborhoods in Texas. Everything about the house had that well-kept, lived-in feel to it. It was the kind of place where you'd never expect anything bad to happen. The parents had always told me how friendly the neighbors were. You can always count on the person next door, they'd said, and they were right. I could see why they felt so comfortable in their home. It felt safe. So I wasn't worried, not even a little. I was in the kitchen, washing the last few dishes from dinner, when I noticed the backyard motion sensor light flicker on. It wasn't a sudden flash or anything. It just kind of glowed for a moment. The light was on the corner of the house next to the back gate, and it was the kind of light that activated whenever someone or something walked by. I wasn't alarmed by it. I figured maybe it was a stray animal, some raccoon or possum, maybe, just passing through the yard. It's not unusual for that kind of thing to happen. The back of the house faced a small field, and the neighborhood was surrounded by trees. You couldn't really see too much at night, but the light cast a soft, yellowish glow over the yard, enough to make out shapes and movement. I shrugged and went back to washing the dishes. But then, just a few minutes later, the light flickered again. At first, I thought it was just some animal again, but something was different this time. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I had this strange feeling like I wasn't alone. It was that subtle shift in the air. You know what I mean? The way the atmosphere can change just enough for you to feel it, but not be able to explain why. I walked over to the window and peeked outside, squinting to try to see through the shadows. The light wasn't bright enough to illuminate everything, but it was enough to make out the fence and the trees just beyond it. My heart gave an unexpected jolt as I saw something moving. It wasn't a small animal this time. No, this was definitely a person. A shadowy figure, tall and lanky, moving slowly along the edge of the fence. My breath caught in my throat. The figure wasn't moving like a person would on a casual walk. It wasn't just passing by. It was deliberate, careful, almost like they were trying not to be seen. I froze, my hand gripping the windowsill as I watched the figure move closer toward the back gate. My mind raced. Was it someone lost? Maybe just a neighbor passing through, but why would they be so cautious about it? I strained my eyes, but the darkness made it difficult to see clearly. I couldn't make out any features or even the person's clothing, just the vague silhouette of them creeping closer to the yard. I stood there staring for what felt like an eternity, but the figure never seemed to notice. It just kept moving, staying close to the fence, disappearing behind the bushes. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. I thought maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. So I shook my head, trying to clear the unease that had suddenly settled in my chest. I turned away from the window and went back to the sink, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But even as I washed the dishes, I kept glancing back at the window, waiting for the light to flicker on again. It felt like the air had thickened somehow, like something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The silence was too heavy, and my mind kept going back to that figure, the shadow that had moved just beyond the fence. Why had they been there? What were they doing? I glanced over at the kids' room. Ava and Jake were both asleep. I knew they were fine, but I couldn't ignore this nagging sense that something wasn't right. I shook my head, telling myself I was overthinking things, but just as I was about to head back to the living room, I saw it again. The motion sensor light flickered on. This time, I didn't wait. I rushed to the window, and there he was, the same figure, standing still just behind the fence again, watching. My heart skipped a beat. The figure was standing still again, but this time it wasn't moving, just watching. It was as if he knew I was watching him, and the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. There was no way this was some random passerby. Why would anyone be standing still like that, staring into someone's backyard at this hour? I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. Was I just paranoid? Maybe it was nothing. I wanted to believe it was, but deep down I knew I wasn't imagining this. The man's presence felt too real, too deliberate. I stepped back from the window, my breath shallow. The last thing I wanted was for this guy to know I was in the house, watching him. My brain kept telling me that I should call the parents, but I didn't want to worry them over nothing. What could they do from there anyway? I needed to be calm. Still, my gut told me something wasn't right. I glanced over at the back door. It was locked, but that didn't make me feel any better. I had no idea who this person was or what he wanted. It felt like the kind of thing that could escalate quickly, and the last thing I wanted was for something to happen to these kids I was responsible for. I was here to keep them safe, and I wasn't sure how to do that when I couldn't even explain what was going on. I quickly walked through the house, making sure all the other doors and windows were secure. The house was dark, save for the glow from the kitchen light, and the silence felt suffocating. I didn't even want to go near the back door, but I knew I had to check. I slowly moved toward the hallway, trying not to make any noise, and peeked through the blinds at the back of the house. There he was again, the man. He hadn't moved, still standing by the fence, almost as if waiting. My stomach flipped. I tried to convince myself that maybe he was just some stranger passing by. Maybe he was just walking home from a friend's house, but why was he hanging around? Why was he so still? There was no way this was normal. I stepped back from the window, my thoughts running wild. I quickly checked on the kids. Ava and Jake were both asleep in their rooms, and I let out a shaky breath of relief. They were fine, but the anxiety bubbling inside me wasn't going away. I needed to take action. I couldn't just sit there and wait. The motion sensor light flickered again. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and quickly dialed the parents' number, but it went straight to voicemail. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. What was I supposed to do now? I didn't want to call 911 unless I was absolutely sure something was wrong. But as I stood there in the dim light, I heard something. A faint sound coming from the back door. A rattle. It was faint at first, so soft I almost thought I imagined it, but then it happened again. The rattle grew louder, more distinct. Someone was trying to open the back door. My heart nearly stopped. I knew right then that this wasn't some innocent stranger passing through. The man was trying to break in. I bolted to the kids' room, my mind a blur of panic. I couldn't let the man get inside. I had to protect them. I looked at Ava and Jake, still peacefully asleep, completely unaware of the danger lurking outside their window. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my hands trembling as I did. I couldn't think. I just moved instinctively. I rushed into the master bedroom and pushed open the door to the walk-in closet. It was dark inside, but I knew it was the safest place. "Come on, kids," I whispered urgently as I grabbed Jake, picking him up in one swift motion and motioned for Ava to follow me. She rubbed her eyes and sleepily followed me into the closet, still not fully awake. I locked the closet door behind us, the click of the lock echoing in the stillness of the house. I dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but every second felt like an eternity. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps now, heavy, slow, deliberate. They weren't outside anymore. They were inside the house. The man had broken in. I pressed my back against the wall of the closet, trying to steady my breath. Ava was next to me, her tiny body trembling against mine. Jake was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding us. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What if this wasn't just a robbery? What if the man had other intentions? I strained my ears, trying to catch every sound, but all I could hear was the heavy breathing in my own chest. The footsteps had stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe he was just going through the house looking for valuables, but then I heard something else, something that froze my blood. A drawer opening, then another. Cabinets slamming shut. The man was searching, rummaging through the house, taking anything he could find, and then everything went still. The silence was suffocating, and for a moment, I thought maybe the man had left, maybe he'd taken what he wanted and moved on. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The softest creak of the bedroom door opening sent a jolt of terror through me. I had to hold my breath. I had to stay as quiet as possible. If he heard us, if he found us in this closet, there was no telling what would happen. I pressed my hand over Ava's mouth to keep her from making any noise. Her wide, frightened eyes locked onto mine, and she stayed perfectly still. I could hear her heartbeat matching mine, fast and frantic. The footsteps had moved closer. I could hear them just outside the bedroom now. And then a noise that made my heart stop. Something scraping on the hardwood floor, like boots dragging across it. The man was in the bedroom now. The air inside the closet felt thick, almost suffocating. I could hear Ava's breathing, quick and shallow, as she clung to me. Jake, still blissfully unaware, stirred a little in my arms, but didn't wake. The operator on the other end of the phone kept talking to me, her voice calm and reassuring, but I couldn't focus on her words anymore. My mind was elsewhere, completely fixated on the footsteps. The soft creak of the bedroom door opening sent another shiver through me, my heart hammering in my chest. The man was inside now, just on the other side of the wall. I held my breath, willing my body to stay still, to make no sound. The kids, sensing my fear, didn't make a sound either. We were a tight little knot in the corner of the closet, barely moving, barely breathing. Everything in the house seemed to hold its breath. The footsteps stopped, and then, just like that, the sound of something heavy shifting on the floor. A dresser being moved. I could picture it in my head. He was looking through the drawers, opening them one by one, throwing clothes aside, searching. The house creaked under the weight of his movements, and the silence was more oppressive than anything I'd ever felt. My mind raced. What was he looking for? Was he just a thief, or was there something worse in store? I couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't just about money. My stomach twisted as I thought about how close he was to finding us, how close he was to finding me and the kids. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. A deep, unsettling silence fell over the house. I dared to peek out of the closet's crack, but all I could see was the shadow of the door. I couldn't hear the man anymore, couldn't hear anything except the sound of my own pulse ringing in my ears. And then, suddenly, a loud bang shook the closet door. Ava let out a sharp gasp, and Jake, still unaware, shifted in my arms. The force of the bang rattled the entire closet. I could hear the handle twisting, and the wood creaked like it was about to give way. He was trying to get in. I pressed my hand against the door, holding it steady, but my entire body was trembling now. I glanced down at Ava, who was clutching me so tightly her knuckles were white, her wide eyes full of fear. I whispered, "Stay quiet, don't make a sound." I was holding my breath, every muscle in my body tense, praying that the door would hold. The handle twisted again, and I heard a muffled voice, a low murmur, barely audible, coming from the other side. The man was speaking to himself, maybe trying to figure out what was behind the door. He seemed so close, like he was right there, just inches away. I felt like I was going to suffocate, but I had no choice but to stay as quiet as possible. Ava whimpered softly, and I pressed my finger to my lips, signaling her to stay silent. We couldn't give him any reason to find us. Then, thank God, just as the man rattled the handle once more, I heard the distant wail of sirens. It was faint at first, but growing louder, closer. My heart almost exploded with relief, but I couldn't let my guard down. Not yet. The footsteps outside the door froze. I strained my ears, holding my breath, waiting. I could feel Ava's little hands clutching my arm, her body stiff with fear. Jake, still oblivious to the danger, shifted in my arms again, and I fought to keep him quiet. I kept my phone pressed to my ear, and I could hear the 911 operator's soothing voice still on the line, telling me the police were just moments away. But I knew it could take just one wrong move, one sound, for the situation to turn deadly. And then I heard it. The back door slammed open. The sound echoed through the house, and my heart jumped into my throat. The man was running. He was running toward the back of the house, desperate to get away. I listened, barely breathing, as the sound of his footsteps pounded against the floor, growing fainter and fainter. Then, silence. I waited a few moments before daring to unlock the closet door, just enough to peek out. I saw nothing. The house was eerily quiet now. The sirens were still faint in the distance, but they were getting closer. My heart was still racing as I slowly crept toward the bedroom, my mind desperately trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. As I made my way to the front door, I saw the flashing lights of the police cars through the window. Relief flooded my body, but the tight knot in my chest didn't go away. The officers arrived just moments later, storming into the house with their flashlights scanning every corner. I explained everything as best as I could, my voice shaking, still trying to process the chaos that had just unfolded. They combed through the house, but the man was long gone by the time they arrived. When the parents came home, they were shaken to find out what had happened. They were grateful the kids were unharmed, but I could see the dread in their eyes. If I hadn't locked that closet door when I did, if I hadn't kept them quiet, it was a thought I couldn't bear to finish. They asked if I was okay, but the truth was, I wasn't. I could never forget that feeling, knowing someone was in the house so close and I was helpless to do anything except hide. The fear of that man standing in the dark, waiting, searching, haunted me for weeks. Though the police tried to investigate, the intruder was never caught. The house was ransacked. Jewelry, cash, and small valuables were taken. But it wasn't just a robbery. I couldn't shake the feeling that if the police hadn't shown up when they did, it would have been so much worse. I never babysat again. Not after that night. And every time I hear sirens in the distance or see a shadow pass by my window, I can't help but think of that man in the backyard. It was a cool Friday evening in late autumn when I got the call from Mrs. Carter. I was a high school senior at the time, trying to juggle homework, college applications, and part-time jobs. Babysitting was one of those part-time gigs that seemed simple enough, watching a few kids for a couple of hours, getting paid, and then heading home. Not too complicated. The Carters lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Their house was one of those big, well-kept homes with a sprawling front yard, neatly trimmed hedges, and a porch that looked like it belonged on a postcard. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names, and the evenings were always calm, serene, perfect for raising kids. Jake was 6 years old, and his younger sister, Lily, was 4. I had babysat for them a few times before, so I was already familiar with the house, the kids, and the routine. They were both sweet kids. Jake could be a bit energetic, bouncing around the house non-stop, while Lily was a little more shy but had a soft spot for princess cartoons and storybooks. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the typical dynamic of siblings. That night, I arrived at the Carters' house around 5:30 p.m., a little early, just to get settled in. Mrs. Carter greeted me with her usual warm smile, gave me the rundown of the evening, and left me with a few instructions for the kids. "Make sure they don't eat too many sweets," she laughed, as if that was going to be my biggest challenge of the evening. I assured her everything would be fine. They were leaving for a dinner date at a local restaurant, a new place that had opened up nearby. "It's been ages since we've had a night out," Mr. Carter joked as he handed me a small stack of bills as payment. "Enjoy your evening, Charlotte." I waved them off as they climbed into their car and drove down the quiet street, leaving the house to me. Everything felt calm and peaceful. By the time the clock struck 8 p.m., the kids were tucked into bed, each of them wrapped up in their respective blankets. Jake had tried to negotiate for one more episode of his favorite cartoon, but I had managed to get him to sleep with a story about a dragon and a knight. Lily, on the other hand, fell asleep almost immediately, her little breaths soft and rhythmic as she curled up with her stuffed bunny. I had a little time to myself now, which meant I could relax. I plopped down on the couch in the living room, my phone in hand. I didn't feel like doing anything too demanding, so I started scrolling through social media, checking messages, responding to a few friends, and catching up on the latest news. There was a warmth in the house, despite the evening chill outside. The light from the fireplace in the corner flickered softly, casting a warm glow across the room. After a little while, I decided to order food for myself. There was a local pizza place nearby that I liked, and I was in the mood for something comforting. I dialed the number, the ringing filling the quiet house as I waited for someone to answer. "Pizza Palace, how can I help you?" The voice on the other end said. I placed my order, just a small pepperoni pizza, nothing fancy, and was told it would be delivered in about 20 minutes. I hung up and leaned back, scrolling through my phone again while I waited. I'll admit I was looking forward to a quiet night. It felt nice to just be alone, the kids sleeping upstairs, the house still and peaceful. Maybe I'd even watch a movie after I ate. It was one of those nights that felt like it would pass without incident, like any other. Delivery came around 8:20 p.m. I hadn't expected the delivery guy to be so late, but the pizza was warm enough. I stood up, making sure to grab my wallet before heading to the door. I'd made sure to latch the chain on the door before answering, just out of habit. The chain was always a good idea, especially when it came to people I didn't know well. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the delivery guy. He was tall, probably around 6 feet, and had a scruffy look to him. His hair was dark and messy, the kind that hadn't seen a comb in days. His face was rough, worn, like he hadn't taken care of himself in a while. His eyes, though, were the most unsettling part. They were too intense, like he was studying me, analyzing me in a way that made my stomach twist. "Hey there," he said with a big, forced smile, his voice a little too loud for the quiet neighborhood. I greeted him back politely, but there was something about his presence that made me uneasy. I smiled, trying to push that feeling down. "Thanks for the delivery," I said as I took the pizza from him. He lingered at the door longer than I expected, his gaze flicking to the inside of the house before returning to me. "Everything all right with your order?" he asked, his eyes scanning the space behind me. "Yeah, everything's great," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. Then he did something that made my skin crawl. He looked past me into the house, then back to me and asked, "So, do you live here?" I don't know why, but that question struck me as odd. It was too personal, too probing. I gave him a tight-lipped smile and shrugged, not wanting to give him any more information than necessary. "Just babysitting," I said quickly, trying to close the door without being rude. He smiled again, but this time, it wasn't a friendly smile. It was almost like a smile of someone who knew something you didn't, or maybe someone who was trying to hide something. "Ah, all right," he said, his voice a little too casual. "Well, have a good night then." I nodded and quickly shut the door, securing the chain and locking it behind me. I stood there for a moment, leaning against the door, trying to shake the odd feeling that had settled over me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the late hour making me overthink things. But that man's eyes, the way he seemed to study me, lingered in my thoughts. It wasn't until I returned to the living room and sat back down that I realized how much my heart was still racing. Something felt off, and no amount of reasoning with myself could shake it. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. It was probably nothing. Just a strange delivery guy. But still a knot tightened in my stomach. As I settled back on the couch, I noticed the house was quieter than usual. It was that kind of silence that makes your mind wander, the kind that makes you notice every creak in the floorboards and every draft in the air. I couldn't quite place it, but something about the house seemed different. It wasn't the kind of silence you could relax into. It was tense. I glanced at the clock. 8:40 p.m. The kids were still asleep, and there was nothing for me to do but wait until the parents came back. I decided to distract myself by browsing through my phone again. But even as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something I couldn't see. It was hard to explain, but the feeling didn't go away. It sat there in the back of my mind, tugging at me, making me anxious for no clear reason. The house felt colder now, even though the heat was on, and the sound of the wind outside had died down to nothing. The only noise I could hear was the occasional hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faintest rustling of the trees outside. I kept trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, nothing had happened, right? The delivery guy had left and the kids were still asleep upstairs. Everything was fine. Everything was fine. But the silence seemed unnaturally thick, like the house was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a little unsettling moment that would pass. The parents wouldn't be home for another hour, so I had plenty of time to relax and unwind. I started flipping through my phone again, distracted by the usual posts and memes, but my mind kept drifting back to the feeling in my gut. Around 9 p.m., I decided to check on the kids. I hadn't heard any sounds from upstairs for a while, so I figured they were deep in sleep by now. I walked quietly up the stairs, the old wood creaking under my feet with every step. The house was still, almost too still, and for a second I felt like I was the only person in the world. It was a strange thought, one that didn't quite make sense. I peeked into Jake's room first. He was curled up in his bed, his blankets tangled around his legs, but he looked peaceful, his little chest rising and falling steadily with each breath. I smiled to myself and tiptoed to Lily's room next. She was the same, snuggled up with her stuffed bunny, her blonde hair spilling over the pillow like a halo. I stood there for a moment watching them sleep, feeling a strange sense of calm. They were fine. Everything was fine. But just as I was about to head back downstairs, I heard it. A faint noise. At first it was so quiet I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. A rustling sound, like something or someone was moving around outside. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen, my ears ringing with the sudden silence. The noise wasn't coming from inside the house. It was coming from the backyard. The kind of rustling that only happens when the wind moves through the trees or when something disturbs the dry leaves on the ground. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind. It had to be the wind. But then the rustling came again, and this time it was louder, more distinct. Someone was out there. I stood in place for a long moment, my breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, go back downstairs, and just pretend I hadn't heard anything. But the other part, the part that was slowly growing more alarmed, insisted that something wasn't right. The rustling grew louder still. It wasn't wind, it wasn't trees moving, it was deliberate. It was someone moving around, creeping through the yard. I glanced back at the kids' rooms, making sure they were still okay. I didn't want to wake them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something. My heart was racing now, my pulse pounding in my ears as I slowly made my way back downstairs. Every step felt like an eternity. The house, which had once felt so calm and safe, now felt like a trap. I couldn't explain it. The walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows stretching longer and longer as the light from the living room flickered. I grabbed my phone and opened the security app, my hands trembling. The house had a few cameras, including one pointed at the backyard. I quickly selected the camera feed for the back porch. My stomach dropped as the image loaded. There, standing just outside the sliding glass door, was the delivery man. His face was pressed against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking. He was just standing there, staring into the house. His breath fogged up the glass, but he didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there. I stared at the screen for what felt like a lifetime. My breath was shallow, my chest tightening as I tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't normal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rush to the door and confront him, but I knew better. I knew that wouldn't be safe. I had to think. I had to stay calm. I quickly backed out of the app and scanned the rest of the house, checking the windows and doors. Every single one was locked. My hands shook as I hurried to check the locks on the other doors, making sure everything was secure. Just as I turned back to the living room, a shadow flickered past the front window. I froze again. Whoever was outside wasn't just at the back. They were moving around the house. Slowly, methodically. A knot tightened in my stomach. My instincts screamed at me to do something, anything, but I didn't know what. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a plan. I was just one terrified teenage girl alone in a large house with 2 sleeping kids and an intruder who knew exactly where I was. The minutes felt like hours. I didn't know if I was more afraid of what was happening outside or the suffocating, paralyzing fear I felt inside. Then there was another noise. This time it was unmistakable. A knock. A sharp, sudden knock at the door. I felt the blood drain from my face. My breath hitched in my throat as I quickly scrambled for my phone again, dialing 911. My voice was barely a whisper when I spoke to the operator. "Please, Someone's outside. I think they're trying to break in." The operator's voice was calm, trying to reassure me. "We'll send someone right away. Are you in immediate danger? Can you lock yourself in a room?" I wanted to scream, but all I could do was nod, even though no one could see me. "Yes," I whispered. The operator told me to stay on the line, but I couldn't. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't even think. I just heard that knock again. I quickly hung up on the operator, too scared to say anything more. My mind raced in 100 different directions, but all I could think about was getting the kids to safety. I couldn't let anything happen to them, not on my watch. I rushed upstairs as quietly as possible, trying not to make a sound. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat loud in my ears as I silently opened the kids' bedroom doors. They were both still asleep, their tiny forms curled up under their blankets. The sight of them, so innocent and unaware, gave me a moment of clarity. I had to protect them. I carefully lifted Jake first, doing my best not to wake him. His little body was warm in my arms, and his soft breathing reassured me, if only for a second. I moved to Lily's room next, gently scooping her up into my arms, her stuffed bunny still clutched in one hand. The house felt like it was closing in on me as I quickly moved back downstairs, my breath shallow and rapid. I glanced at the windows, expecting to see the shadow outside any moment, but all I saw was darkness. The front door's light was still on, casting a faint yellow glow against the porch. I headed towards the master bedroom. There was a small closet in there, one I knew was big enough for the three of us. My plan was simple: get the kids in there, barricade the door, and wait for the police to arrive. But as I passed the living room, I froze. There was a sound, the sound of a doorknob rattling. It was coming from the front door. I felt the blood drain from my face as I backed away slowly, trying to keep my breath steady. The rattling grew louder, and then the door creaked open, the unmistakable sound of a door pushing against its frame. He was inside. I turned on my heels, heart hammering in my chest, and bolted toward the stairs. The children were still asleep in my arms, unaware of the danger that was so close. I couldn't afford to wake them. Not yet. I reached the top of the stairs and hurried into the first bedroom I could find, the one with a locked door. I didn't even have time to think. I shoved the dresser in front of the door, wedging it tight, hoping it would hold. The pounding of footsteps echoed in the hallway below. I could hear them, each step deliberate and heavy, getting closer. Then I heard the unmistakable creak of the stairs. He was coming upstairs. As the footsteps grew closer to the bedroom door, my heart raced. And then bang, 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 fists pounding relentlessly against the door. I gasped, my hands trembling, barely able to hold on to Lily and Jake. I could hear him, the delivery man, grunting as he pounded the door again. His voice, muffled but rising with rage, shouted, "I know you're in there." My breath caught in my throat, my eyes darting to the window, but the house was still dark and I couldn't see anything. I could hear the sirens now, faint, distant, but growing louder by the second. The next few moments felt like an eternity. Time stretched, warping, making everything seem impossibly slow. And then, just when I thought I couldn't breathe anymore, the sound of sirens wailing outside grew deafening. A moment later, the door burst open. The intruder stopped pounding. I could hear him running, his footsteps clattering across the floor as he bolted. But it was too late. I heard the crash of the front door as the police flooded in. They shouted orders, their voices commanding and clear. I heard them moving through the house, each step decisive. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there. They were coming for him. Minutes later, the door to the bedroom burst open, and I saw two officers standing there, guns drawn, their eyes scanning the room. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of them asked. I nodded, my voice too choked to speak. All I could do was nod. The officers moved swiftly, clearing the hallway and rushing toward the kitchen. I could hear shuffling, then a shout, followed by a loud crash, and then the sound of heavy boots on the tile. I didn't hear anything for a few moments. The silence was absolute. And then a voice. It wasn't the police, it was the delivery man's voice. You don't understand. You don't get it. I was just trying to. But his words were cut off by the sharp sound of handcuffs clicking into place. The police officer returned shortly after, his face grim. You're safe now, ma'am. He won't hurt anyone again. It wasn't until then that I finally let myself breathe. It was over. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding back until my legs gave way beneath me. I collapsed to the floor, holding the kids close to my chest, my body shaking uncontrollably. The officer sat down next to me, his voice soft as he said, "We've got him." The police arrested him right there in the kitchen, where they found him holding a large knife. He had been waiting for me to open the door. He had been waiting to get inside. Later, I found out more about him. He had been stalking multiple women in the area, tracking deliveries, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that night, it was me. I was just an unsuspecting babysitter, alone in a house with 2 kids, trying to get through the night. But I wasn't just a babysitter. I was his target. And with that, the terrifying ordeal came to an end. The Carters returned shortly after, shocked and horrified by the story I had to tell. But I didn't need to explain everything. They could see the fear in my eyes, and they could feel the weight of what had happened. After that night, nothing felt the same. It's strange how you can look back at something and think, that was the moment everything changed. At the time, I was just doing what any other teenager would do, babysitting my little brother. I never imagined that one night, in a house that was supposed to be a fresh start for my family, I would end up witnessing something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is Ava, and I'm 18 years old. We had just moved to a new house in a suburban neighborhood in Texas. It was one of those brand new homes with all the latest features: stainless steel appliances, glossy hardwood floors, and light, airy rooms. My parents were excited about the move, but I couldn't help but feel uneasy about it. The house felt too perfect, almost like it was staged for a magazine photo shoot. Everything was crisp, clean, and untouched. I was the oldest of 2 kids, with my younger brother Liam being 5 years old. Liam was a handful, full of energy, always asking questions, and often coming up with stories that seemed way too vivid for his age. But despite all that, I loved him dearly. Our parents had just gone out to some event that night, leaving me in charge for a few hours. It wasn't a big deal. I was used to taking care of him, and I liked the idea of having some quiet time to myself. The night started off like any other babysitting gig. I fed Liam his dinner, we played a few board games, and then I tucked him into bed around 9:30 p.m. I remember his little face looking up at me, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked, brushing some of his messy brown hair out of his eyes. "Yeah," he said softly, clutching his stuffed animal to his chest. I don't like the new house." I chuckled, trying to ease his worry. "It's okay, Liam. We'll be fine here. You'll get used to it, I promise." But even as I said that, I wasn't entirely sure if I believed it myself. The house did have this strange, quiet atmosphere, like something was always waiting just around the corner. I didn't want to scare him, though, so I kissed him on the forehead and whispered, "Good night." I headed downstairs to the living room, collapsing onto the couch with my phone in hand. The house was completely still. There wasn't a single sound except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I felt like I could almost hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. It was peaceful, too peaceful. And as I began to scroll through my phone looking for something to distract me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. I thought it was just my imagination, a product of being in a new, unfamiliar place. I mean, I'd heard plenty of people talk about the eerie feeling that comes with living in a new house, and I'd even read a few ghost stories online that seemed to match the vibe of this place. But I told myself to stop being ridiculous. There was nothing wrong with this house. Nothing at all. I must have been sitting there for about an hour when I heard it. Liam's voice, faint and shaky, calling my name from upstairs. Ava! Ava! I rolled my eyes, expecting to find him having some kind of bad dream. He'd had nightmares before, and usually he'd just need a little comforting. But I sighed and got up, walking toward the stairs. The house felt different this time, though. The air seemed heavier, almost thick with something I couldn't quite name. My footsteps echoed through the quiet hallway, the floor creaking under my weight. As I ascended the stairs, the usual squeaks and groans of the house seemed louder, more pronounced. When I reached the top, I hesitated outside Liam's room. The door was slightly ajar, the faint glow of the hallway lights spilling into the room. I pushed it open, expecting to find him snuggled under his blanket, probably just having trouble falling asleep. But when I walked in, I saw him sitting up in bed, eyes wide open. He wasn't crying, but there was something unsettling about the way he was looking at me. It wasn't like he was just scared from a nightmare. No, this was different. He looked terrified. Liam? I asked softly, my voice barely a whisper. What's wrong, buddy? He didn't answer at first. Instead, he stared at me, his small hands gripping his blanket like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the bed. His chest was rising and falling rapidly, like he'd been holding his breath. The other boy won't let me sleep, he said, his voice shaky, barely above a whisper. I frowned, not sure what he meant. The other boy? I asked, feeling the familiar panic that comes when you realize your little brother is saying something you don't quite understand. What other boy? Liam's eyes darted nervously around the room, his body rigid, as if he was trying to avoid looking at something. The boy who talks to me. In the dark. I froze. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. The room felt colder, as if the air had suddenly shifted, and I couldn't explain why. I reached out and touched Liam's arm, trying to reassure him, but I could feel my heart starting to race. There's no other boy in this house, Liam, I said, my voice a little too sharp. It's just you and me here. But he shook his head, his small body trembling. No, Ava, there's a boy. He whispers to me when it's dark. He says I'm not supposed to be here. He says I have to leave. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice calm. It's okay, Liam. You're just scared because this house is new, okay? It's a big house, and sometimes it feels weird. But there's no other boy, I promise. But Liam wasn't convinced. His eyes welled up with tears, and his little hand reached out to grab mine. He's in my room, he whispered, his voice quivering. He's in my room, and he's not nice. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as just an overactive imagination. After all, kids have vivid dreams and imaginary friends all the time, right? But something in the way Liam was acting, the terror in his eyes, made me pause. Maybe it was the atmosphere of the house. Maybe it was just me being overly sensitive. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong here. I gently pulled the covers back over him and tucked him in a little more tightly. Listen, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. It's probably just a bad dream. Just try to close your eyes and you'll be okay. Liam didn't look convinced, but he finally lay back down, pulling his stuffed bunny closer to his chest. I kissed his forehead and left the room, shutting the door softly behind me. The second I stepped into the hallway, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. The house was too quiet, too still. I shook it off, telling myself it was just nerves, but as I walked down the stairs, I couldn't help but feel like something was watching me. I sank into the couch in the living room, picking up my phone again, but I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept drifting back to what Liam had said. The other boy. What did he mean by that? Who was he talking about? The silence in the house felt suffocating. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the weight of being in a new home. But as the minutes passed, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to see something lurking just out of sight. I tried to distract myself, scrolling through social media, watching random videos, anything to keep my mind off the weird feeling. But then, something strange happened. I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, muffled footsteps, almost like someone walking in another room. I froze, my phone slipping from my hands onto the couch. I was alone in the house. Liam was upstairs, asleep, and my parents were at the event. The house was supposed to be empty, but the footsteps were there. They were unmistakable. There was someone in the house. Someone else. I jumped up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Liam?" I called out, my voice shaking, but there was no answer. The footsteps grew louder, moving across the floor above me. I held my breath, listening. It wasn't just the creaking of the house settling. This was something else. Something deliberate. I took a cautious step toward the stairs, every muscle in my body tense. Something wasn't right. Something was in this house, and I was about to find out what it was. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, listening intently. The footsteps, slow and deliberate, continued above me, moving from room to room. The sound wasn't random. It was as if someone was pacing the halls or deliberately walking through each room in the house. My heart raced, each beat thundering in my chest. I strained to hear any other sounds, any voice, any hint that this was just my imagination running wild. There was nothing. Just the quiet thudding of footsteps, and the air felt thick, heavy. I stood there for what felt like forever, just trying to gather the courage to move. Part of me wanted to bolt out the door and call for help, but the other part, well, the part that wasn't completely terrified, told me to check on Liam first. I knew he was scared. I couldn't just leave him up there alone. Slowly, I stepped forward, my footsteps muffled on the carpet. Each step seemed too loud, echoing in the silence as I crept up the stairs. My pulse hammered in my throat, and I gripped the railing, the cold wood sending a shiver through my body. When I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped and listened again. The footsteps had stopped, but the air felt oppressive. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the faint rustling of the wind outside, but nothing else. It was too quiet, too still. I took a deep breath and forced myself to walk toward Liam's room, my feet moving on autopilot. When I reached the door, I pushed it open gently, expecting to find him curled up in bed, maybe having another bad dream. But what I found made my stomach drop. Liam wasn't in bed. The covers were thrown off, the pillow askew, but the bed was empty. I blinked, my heart dropping into my stomach. I took a cautious step into the room, looking around. Where is he? And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, near the window, was Liam. He was standing there, his back to me, facing the wall. His small hands were pressed to the glass, his face inches from it as if he were looking out into the dark yard. "Liam," I called out, my voice cracking. "Liam, what are you doing?" He didn't respond. He didn't even turn around. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my throat. "Liam," I repeated, louder this time, panic creeping into my voice. Still no response, and that's when I noticed it. There was a soft, almost inaudible sound coming from him, a kind of low, rhythmic murmur, like someone whispering. But it wasn't him, it was coming from him. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He finally turned his head slightly, his eyes wide, but there was something in his expression that sent a chill straight through me. His face was pale, his lips parted slightly, and there was a strange kind of blankness in his eyes. "The other boy," he whispered, his voice distant and vacant. "He's here. He says I'm not supposed to be in this room." I felt a lump form in my throat, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy blanket. I stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder, concandering me, but he flinched as if I'd touched something too cold. Liam, I said, my voice shaking. There's no other boy. You're safe here. You're okay. But he shook his head, his lips trembling. He's in here, Ava. He's always in here. He says you can't stay in my room. He's mad. I didn't know what to do. His words didn't make sense, but his fear was so real, so tangible, that I couldn't dismiss it. I grabbed his hand and tried to pull him away from the window, but as soon as I touched him, the air around us seemed to grow colder. The chill that had been creeping through the house all night grew stronger, like something was pressing in on us. I could feel it, almost as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees in just a moment. I could hear it now, scratching. It wasn't just the occasional creak of old house settling or wind brushing against the walls. No, this was something else, something deliberate. It was coming from the walls. Soft, rhythmic scraping, as if something was moving inside the walls themselves. I couldn't see it, couldn't even tell where it was coming from, but I could feel it. What is that? I thought, my heart racing faster. I pulled Liam away from the window and tugged him toward the door. We need to go downstairs, I whispered urgently. I grabbed Liam and yanked him out of the room, slamming the door behind me as I raced toward the stairs. I didn't know what was going on, but all I could think was that we needed to get out of that room. We needed to leave the top floor, leave the house if I had to. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I could feel that thing, that presence, watching us, waiting. I rushed down the stairs with Liam in tow, my hand gripping his so tight I was sure it would leave a mark. When we reached the living room, I was out of breath, my chest heaving from fear. I was starting to panic. I tried calling my parents, but the phone wouldn't connect. I pulled Liam toward the front door, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the keys. But just before I could open it, I heard whispering, although it was not clear. It was chilling, unnatural, and it made my blood run cold. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just kept fumbling with the door, trying to get it open, but the key wouldn't turn. Please, Ava, Liam begged, his voice frantic. We need to go. He's going to be mad. I finally managed to force the door open, pulling Liam out into the yard, my mind spinning with confusion and fear. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't finished with us. We stood there on the front lawn, staring at the house, still gripped by that gnawing fear. Liam was shaking uncontrollably in my arms, his little body pressed against mine, as if he thought I could protect him from whatever was lurking in the dark corners of that house. But the truth was, I didn't feel safe either. My legs felt weak. My mind clouded with 1,000 questions I couldn't answer. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the silence growing unbearable. After what felt like an eternity, the headlights of a car finally appeared on the road. I squinted into the darkness, barely able to make out the shape of the vehicle as it pulled up to the driveway. It was my parents, finally home from their event. I rushed toward them, my voice breaking as I called out, "Mom! Dad, you need to come inside. Something's wrong with the house. Liam's been saying things, weird things." They parked the car and quickly got out. My mother, a little tipsy from the event, gave me a confused look. "Ava, what's going on? Why are you out here? It's late." I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "Mom, please, just come inside. I don't know what's happening, but I'm scared. Liam's been acting strange. The house, it feels wrong." My dad followed behind, frowning. "What do you mean, wrong? Ava, calm down. It's just an old house. You're tired, probably just overthinking everything." But I couldn't calm down. Not after what had happened, not after what Liam had said, the scratchy whispers, the footsteps, the thing that had been in the walls. I couldn't let it go. It wasn't just my imagination. It was real. We went inside, and as soon as the door clicked shut behind us, the temperature dropped again. The air felt heavy, like it had when I was upstairs with Liam. I didn't want to go any further into the house. I stood frozen in the hallway, my eyes darting nervously toward the stairs, towards the room where it had all started. "Liam, sweetheart, come here," my mom called softly, but Liam didn't move. He was standing in the living room, clutching his stuffed bunny tightly to his chest. He didn't even look at us. I approached him cautiously. "Liam, you okay, buddy?" I asked, my voice shaking. But his eyes weren't the same. They were empty, glassy, unfocused. "He's angry," Liam murmured. "He says I have to leave. He doesn't like you here." My heart dropped into my stomach. I turned to my parents, my voice breaking. "Mom, Dad, there's something wrong with him, with this house. We need to get out." But before they could respond, the lights flickered. It wasn't just a flicker. It was as though the power was surging, desperately trying to stay on. And then, all at once, everything went out. The house was plunged into darkness. I heard my mom gasp, and I felt her hand on my arm, gripping it tightly as the darkness settled in around us. The air had grown so cold now that I could see my breath fogging up in front of me. It was almost unbearable, this silence, this thick, suffocating coldness. Then came the sound, the whisper. It was faint at first, almost inaudible, but then louder, clearer, right next to my ear, like it was inside my head. "Get out! Get out!" I jumped back, gasping, but when I turned, I saw it. In the corner of the room, just barely visible in the shadows, there was a shape, a shadow, small, hunched, like a child crouched in the corner, waiting. The whispering came from there, and as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could make out the faint outline of something, someone, standing there. "Dad," I whispered, my voice barely a squeak. "Dad, look." But when my father turned to look, his face went pale. "No, there's nothing there, Ava. You're imagining it, there's nothing there." But I knew what I had seen. I knew what was standing there in the corner, and it wasn't just in my mind. We stood frozen, paralyzed by fear, as the whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent. And then, as if on cue, the house shook, just a little, but enough to send a ripple through the air. The lights flickered back on for a split second before cutting out entirely again, leaving us in pitch black. When the lights returned, it was as though everything had changed. The house was silent. The oppressive weight in the air had lifted, the temperature had returned to normal, and the whispering had stopped. My parents were staring at me now, unsure of what to think. They hadn't seen what I had seen, and they couldn't understand why I was so terrified. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the atmosphere shifted again. The feeling of being watched, the chill in the air, it all seemed to vanish like it was never there. The next morning, my parents explained it all away. Maybe I had just been stressed from babysitting, or maybe I was just tired, they said. But I knew. I knew something had happened in that house. When they mentioned the possibility of us moving, I didn't protest. It wasn't until weeks later, when I overheard them talking, that I learned the truth. They'd done a little digging, found out that before they had moved in, there had been a tragedy. A child had died in the house, suffocated in a closet during a break-in gone horribly wrong. It didn't take long after that for my family to pack up and leave. My parents thought it was best, especially after hearing what happened. But Liam, he couldn't sleep alone for years. Even now, as a teenager, he still has trouble when it's too quiet. We left Texas behind, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that house, whatever presence haunted it, followed us. Every time I close my eyes, I remember the sound of the footsteps, the whispers, the boy in the dark, and I wonder if he's still there.